Hello and welcome to another writer's show. We are going to be starting a little bit later than usual by like 15 minutes, but let's start off with Commissar Carl.
Frataco!
On second thought, that particular introduction may need switching out at some point.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Russia's been rather naughty these past few weeks.
Whatever you decide, that's up to you.
Something to think about.
Well, I kind of just don't care. I just see this whole thing as a bunch of children screaming at each other, others saying I want X or I want Y. It's like,
And you better not join NATO, or what? Or will? I mean, if you do join NATO, we won't be able to do anything because they'll be protected. But you better not join them, or else. Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
It's actually early by my standards. And our clocks haven't gone forward yet. It's the wrong time done. It's just it's still at 1. It's still at 1. You're just in frickin' Florida. Anyway, let's bring in a sparring rider.
It would be extremely painful for you.
Do not dare change your intro, Carl. It's the best one we have. You change it, I will be depressed. Your intro. It is literally the best intro we have. Do not change it.
All right, fair enough. It's a relic from a better time when things were clearer.
Oh, you're in Britainland again.
Yeah, she had to spend her time at the passport place until 5 seconds ago, where she finally joined our stream, and they're like, okay, you can't miss that.
Lovely. Alrighty.
Who's on first?
A good question.
That wasn't a question, it was a statement.
Alright, so...
Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
Alrighty. So
I don't care.
Carl. Alright. I suppose we could do Carl first, then aspiring, and then me.
That works.
Mhm.
All right. So if you recall, a few weeks ago, I had to leave Chapter 17 off in the middle because it was getting rather long. And we'll be picking up in the middle of Chapter 17, which I have renamed Talking to Kieran. Now, when last we left Shenna and the mystery boy, who, spoiler for a few minutes from now, is Kieran, they had just been shown the ropes by Magister Quarn at the top of the Moonspire, and they are finally getting to work. We proceed. Right then, Shenna said, looking over the chest of crystals that needed charging. We should probably start by moving these a little closer to the... She glanced over at the basin, bathed in concentrated moonlight. Was there a special word for something like it? Pedestal? Charging basin? Moonlight concentration apparatus? To that thing over there. Shenna grasped the handles on either side of the chest and strained to lift it off the table. After a moment, the boy moved closer and took one of the handles, much to Shenna's relief, and the two of them set the chest down beside the basin. Next, we should... Shenna started, but the boy had already snatched up one of the crystals out of the chest and was holding it under the gathered moonlight. Shenna shrugged and picked up the empty chest, mercifully lighter than its alternate number. No sooner had she set it down beside the boy than he set the first crystal into it, now gleaming brilliantly with its magical charge. Shenna watched as the boy settled into a tight rhythm of work, holding one crystal under the light and picking up the next one with his free hand so that no time was lost between the crystals when he changed them. His intense gaze never left the basin. "And I guess I'll get to work on the pulleys, then," Shenna muttered, more for herself than for the boy. She wandered over to the stone well at the center of the chamber, unsecured the rope from a metal hook at the bottom of the well, and began to feed out the line. Slowly, the metal basket descended into the stone circle and vanished from sight. Shenna continued letting the rope out, eventually getting the idea to pull her arms into her sleeves so that she could grip the rope through the fabric of her robes and avoid rope burns. She glanced back at the boy, still hard at work under the moonlight. "I'm Shenna, by the way." "I know," the boy said without looking up. She blinked. "What?" "He said it," the boy added, still completely focused on the crystals. It was true. Magister Quarn had addressed Shenna by name. He must have picked it up that way. "And you?" Shenna asked. "What about me?" the boy asked back. "What's your name?" "Kieran," the boy said. "Nice to meet you, Kieran," Shenna said, trying to sound polite. "Uh-huh," Kieran grunted, still not looking up from his work. Oh, he was angry at her. There was no question about it. Shenna could see it in the way that he stared at the crystals as he charged them before his eyes. He was using his work as a way to tamp down his rage. There was nothing else for it. Shenna would have to apologize for her unforgivable behavior in the refectory. "I'm sorry," Shenna said. "What?" "About the... back in the refectory," she explained. Do you remember?" "No," Kieran said, finally looking up. "What happened? Did I forget something?" "It's all right. Don't worry about it," Shenna shook her head. "I must be thinking of something else." "Okay," Kieran said, and returned to his task. Shenna let out a silent sigh of relief. So she hadn't offended him after all. It was a great load taken off her mind. And yet, did he really not remember what happened? And he was still being so short of speech with her. Well, maybe he was just shy. If Shenna could just get him talking, he was sure to open up a bit. "So, Kieran," Shenna said, more cheerfully than she truly felt, "where are you from?" "Accra." "Where in Accra are you from?" Shenna pressed further. "Mudtown." "I don't know where that is," Shenna admitted. She remembered hearing of a place called Mudtown on a few occasions, a dangerous corner of the city where the bread was cut with sawdust. But she hadn't been there yet, and if fate was merciful, she never would. "It's over there," Kieran pointed. Shenna followed his finger out the window and over the rooftops of the old city. Kieran seemed to be indicating somewhere to the southwest, probably where Mudtown lay. "And why do they call it Mudtown?" Shenna wondered aloud. "Probably because of the mud," Kieran said flatly. "I suppose that makes sense," Shenna shrugged. "As for me, I'm from Riverwatch." Kieran continued working. "It's a village along the Red River," Shenna went on. "About 2 days' travel upstream, right on a..." She trailed off after a few moments. Kieran's focus remained squarely upon the crystals. Shenna shook her head and returned her focus to the pulley. If he wasn't interested in talking, there was nothing she could do. "Right on a what?" Shenna blinked and looked back at Kieran. "I'm sorry?" "I didn't hear the last part," Kieran said, still seeming to be focused as ever on his task. "Right on a what?" "On a..." Shenna fumbled to collect her thoughts. "What was I talking about again?" "Your village," Kieran said. "Riverwatch. You said it's a village along the Red River, about 2 days upstream, right on a large bend in the river," Shenna finished. So Kieran was paying attention to her after all. and he could repeat her words back at her. If anything, that made the situation worse. The last thing Shenna wanted was for people to think of her as an idle gossip. No, what Shenna needed now was to keep her mind focused on her work. Finally, Shenna reached the end of the rope, and the pulley system came to rest. She peered over the edge of the stone well and tried not to let the dizzying height overwhelm her as she gazed down into the depths of the tower. Shenna could still see the basket, dangling at the edge of the pulley. It seemed to be illuminated, but it was difficult to tell at this distance. As she watched, she thought she could see a distant figure approach the basket and lift something out of it. An instant later, the ropes in front of her began to dance and quiver with slack. After a few moments, the figure at the bottom of the tower placed something else in the basket, and moments later the ropes drew taut again. The next chest of crystals to be charged was ready and waiting. As soon as Shenna was certain that the figure was clear of the basket, she stepped back from the well, picked up the end of her rope, and began to pull the basket back up. The pulley eased the weight considerably, but in its place it made the ordeal dreadfully slow. Before long, Shenna's arms were thick with exhaustion, and a quick glance down the well revealed the basket had barely come halfway up. Shenna had no idea how she was going to manage 5 more round trips like this. Done. Shenna jumped at the sound and looked back to see Kieran standing beside her. Standing and staring at her.
What?
I'm done charging the crystals. Kieran pointed over his shoulder to where the chest lay, filled to the brim with neatly packed crystals, all gleaming with the brilliant light of magic.
Well, good,
Shenna said and continued pulling on the rope. Kieran just stood there and continued to stare at Shenna. Should she make him do something? Just to keep busy while they waited for the next batch of crystals?
Why don't you...
Shenna began, but couldn't think of any particular task to set him to. Carrying the full chest was out of the question, of course. It was heavy enough with 2 people to lift it, and she couldn't possibly subject a young boy like Kieran to that sort of exertion. Helping out with the pulley wasn't feasible either. There was only enough room for 1 pair of hands on the rope. What else was there to do?
Never mind.
Okay, Kieran nodded. A few more minutes passed in horrible silence before the cargo basket emerged from the stone well.
Would you mind terribly if I handle the charging from now on?
Shenna asked as she and Kieran set the new chest down beside the moonlit basin. Okay, Kieran said.
Thank you,
Shenna said, a tremendous wave of relief washing over her. There was no way her arms would have remained attached to her if she'd had to do a full night of pulley work. She opened the chest, picked the first crystal out of it, and held it under the moonlight. She watched as the jewel began to flicker with magic and sighed contentedly as she felt the ache slowly washing out of her arms. It should be a smooth night from here on out. At least for her. She glanced back at Kieran, now at work on the pulley. Well, the boy needed exercise. It would do good to put a little muscle on his arms. Shenna brought her attention back to the crystal, now fully saturated with a solid brilliance that never flickered. That was how you could tell when a crystal was fully charged. Shenna remembered that much at least from her time with Mistress Morana. Of course, this crystal was a far finer specimen than any Mistress Morana had ever used, with its precisely measured dimensions, each side smoothed almost to a mirror sheen, and not a single fracture to be found in its crystalline depths. Shenna set the finished crystal into an empty chest beside her, and pulled out the next one to start the process again. Kieran had a rhythm to this process, Shenna noted as the empty chest slowly began to fill up. She tried to remember how he had done it, and fumbled to imitate the memory. It was more difficult than Kieran had made it look.
Have you worked with magic before?
Shenna asked. Maybe he'd practiced the rhythm before, and that would certainly explain his efficiency. No, Kieran responded. Terse, as expected.
I did a bit of work with magic back in my village, Shenna continued.
more to keep herself entertained than for actual conversation. If Kieran was listening, well, then let him. It was a small thing, of course. We only had 6 crystals in total, but it was more than enough for the village. It couldn't work here, of course, what with there being no south-facing windows in the whole city. Well, you know the reason for that, right? Shenna stopped. What? Had Kieran actually said something? Without being prompted? You know the reason why there are no south-facing windows in Accra? Kieran was turned to face Shenna, with his free hand loosely holding the pulley rope. He wasn't even looking. I don't know, Shenna said, still a little thrown to hear Kieran speaking so freely. Why are there no south-facing windows in Accra? Because that way, Kieran said, the Magisterium can force everyone in the city to buy magic from them instead of collecting it for themselves. Really? Shenna said. It's true, Kieran continued. My big brother told me so. Shenna nodded along, though mostly just to humor the boy. That couldn't possibly be the reason, could it? It had to be something else, something more mundane. I thought it was just for climate, Shenna said, or to protect privacy on upper floors, or something of that sort. No, it's all about control of magic, Kieran kept going. And my big brother, different big brother, he says that when the Magisterium goes out on patrol, they're not really looking for crimes or anything like that. They're actually looking to make sure that people don't collect magic on their own. Oh, that can't possibly be correct, Shenna said. It is when you think about it. You see, the Magisterium gets all its money from selling magic, right? But if people could collect magic on their own, then the Magisterium wouldn't make any money off of it. It's like water sellers, you see? If the waters of Accra were safe to drink, then there wouldn't be any need for water sellers, right? Well, suppose someone came along and said they could make the water safe for everyone to drink right out of the canals. Well, if they were right, then all the water sellers in town would be out of business, so they're going to oppose it because they have to. It's the same way with the Magisterium. They force people to buy magic from them because that's how they survive. But there's more to the Magisterium than just selling magic, Shenna protested. They provide other services as well, and the people of Accra benefit greatly from these. That's true, Kieran said. But those services cost money like everything else, and they don't bring in a profit, so it all depends on the ability of the Magisterium to force people to buy their magic from them. Without it, the whole system falls apart. That's enough, Shenna snapped. You shouldn't say such horrible things. What horrible things? Kieran said. He seemed genuinely confused. Did he really not know? How couldn't he? Those things you were saying about forcing people to... Shenna hesitated. She had to admit Kieran's explanation did make sense, after a fashion. It was just that the way he said it... Well, you should have been more diplomatic with your words, that's all. Okay, Kieran said. He returned to his work with the pulley, and a sullen, gloomy silence filled the air. Well, now I've really gone and hurt his feelings. I'm sorry, Shenna said, returning to her work with the crystals. I shouldn't have been so short with you. It's okay, Kieran said as the pulley reached the end of its rope. No, really, it was my fault, Shenna continued. I'm still adjusting to the way things are here in the city, and I sometimes forget that... You don't have to be sorry, Kieran said, peering down into the well. I like you, Shenna. Really? Of course, Kieran said. You talk. Nobody else talks to me. Oh, well, that's good, Shenna said with some relief. Well, not the bit about other people not talking to you. That's not good. But, oh, you know what I mean. They continued talking on and off for the rest of the evening, until Magister Quarn returned to dismiss them. Sometimes Shenna would do the majority of the talking. Other times Kieran would lead the conversation. Other times they just worked in silence. By night's end, Shenna found herself wondering why she'd ever been afraid of the boy to begin with. Kieran wasn't nearly so intimidating as she had first thought. At least, not once you got him talking. And that's that.
Interesting.
Okay. Let's look through the comments and see what people think.
I think it was just
Airports. I hate airports.
Yep.
Yeah. I've been looking, trying to find some other words. I've been on a constant search for some kind of interjection that I can put in there to make things. Is he a revolutionary? Well, he is. He's not so much a revolutionary, at least. Well, I shouldn't spoil things. He is a Spectrum kid, though, and I'm exploiting him as a fountain of political and economic navel gazing, just to plant those seeds in the audience. And he's also a shameless author self-insert, so that may also have something to do with it.
this one. It's okay. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. The Magisterium does charge for tuition, though. They're making a big exception for Shenna because Karna wants to do something specific with her. Yep.
Raptor liked it.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Raptor with a top hat.
Asperger-ish. Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, I'm one of the last generation of kids to be formally diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, specifically before it was folded into the larger spectrum. So, yeah, I'm a little proud about that. I mean, I am also conflicted because Hans Asperger was kind of a Nazi. I mean, a literal Nazi. He was a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party and had quite a bit of an unsavory history with the T4 involuntary euthanasia program. So perhaps it's good that he's no longer official in that regard. Also, predictably, much of the early research was done by a woman in the Soviet Union who was promptly ignored for about a century because she was a woman and a commie.
Oh my god, a commie.
I know. I know. I fucking hate airports. There was a wedding happening later this year on the other side of the country, and I went and reserved a whole bunch of time off from my boss just so that I could have enough time to take the train there and back. That is how much I fucking hate airports.
The airports are.
Yeah, like when I went to JordanCon last year, I went out of my way to take the train there and back.
Makes sense. Young was a bit of a sympathizer, Herzing.
I mean, on a certain point, you just kind of have to accept that because, you know, eugenics was kind of in the water supply back then. And they didn't yet know where it was going to lead. But Hans Asperger, he was right in the thick of it. He really has no excuse. Yes. If only we could take the train across the Atlantic.
That would indeed be something.
I don't know. Every now and again, you hear something about people making the the rail bridge across the Bering Strait from Alaska to Siberia. You know, to have like a worldwide unified rail network, you know, plus or minus the Darien Gap and a little unrest in the Middle East, but, you know, that sort of thing. And, I mean, if it were feasible, it would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it would.
But there's just too many thousands of miles of nothing on either side that would necessarily have to be developed and sustained in order to make that actually more efficient than just, you know, flying or taking a boat. But what can you do? What can you do? That's just the planet you're stuck with.
Mm-hmm.
Enough about that. Aspiring writer, what have you got for us this week?
When was the last time I read what you, Carl?
I do not know.
What was the last thing you remember?
Oh boy, it would have been a long time ago. Yeah, just give us the full previously on Aspiring Writer.
Well, today is a good day for that, because this is the last chapter with the Kurt POV character for a little while. So we've been going with my second POV character, Q. We first saw him when he was doing a raid on a ship with the Space Benders. We see them manage to successfully hijack the ship, but out of concern for meeting Royal Guard, he decided, maybe I should go underground for a bit. And so he asked Mitra to send him to Sullen 2. He goes there, he decides to meet a contact before going down into the tunnels to hide out for a few days. After speaking with the informant and heading toward the tunnels, he finds that someone's been following him. After a fight with his shadow, he finds out during the fight that it was one of the angels, Gollum, someone who's known for being more or less unkillable and doesn't feel pain. After blowing him to bits, he proceeds to go back to his informant to threaten to kill him and get some information out of him, only to find him dead. He searches the place to find little to no sign of anything except that Gollum and someone else had been there. He steps out of the hostel and sees the second angel, or at least the spirit that the angel puppets around, Rebound. Rebound vanishes, and so he decides to go toward the landing dock and take a ship out of there. And just before he reaches the entrance, he meets Vampira, leader of the Angels. They have a fight, and Vampira is able to zap him and make it so all of his gear short circuits, making him more or less helpless. Mark appears with his invisibility cloak, and after Mark and Vampira have a slight argument about whether or not they should kill him, Mark slugs him unconscious, and he wakes up in a really dark cell. That was the last chapter. He was in a cell. He hacked into the communications of the place with his implant that they haven't removed, and finds that there is someone who has been sharing information on his detainment and his escort the next day, and realizes that someone is going to come and help him, but he doesn't know who or why. And without further ado, the final chapter of his. Q was awake when the wall started to lower again. Standing up, he crossed his arms, determined not to let them see him be bothered by the light. He had to squint at the guards, but otherwise managed to appear unconcerned. The same 4 guards had given him food were there, standing in the wall of blinding light to prevent him from making out anything behind them. They looked at one another, and he got the impression seeing him standing and ready unnerved them. Q felt the touch on his mind he so hated, like the feeling of someone watching you at your most private. Gritting his teeth, he tried keeping his thoughts on the guards. The Mind Host eventually nodded at the other 3, and flanked by the other 2 guards, the Space Host approached Q, his hand twitching toward its dagger. The Space Host, to Q's satisfaction and amusement, was considerably shorter than him, as were the other 2 guards, and they seemed to realize that as they approached him, He probably didn't appear as domineering as when he had his coat, but having almost a head over someone made even someone in a jumpsuit intimidating. The two guards with plasma rifles went to stand at either side of the cell, making sure not to be directly opposite each other. Once Boat nodded to the space host, he reached for Q, hand gripping the hilt of his dagger. Realizing what was happening, Q braced himself as the space host touched his chest. In an instant, he was from one small dark cell to another small dark cell. His face tightened as the nauseating effects of teleportation made him feel sick in his stomach, but he remained upright, accustomed to the ill feeling teleportation gave him. The space host himself seemed to be doing worse than Q, despite space hosts being able to handle their own teleportations better than whoever they brought along with them. Hand on his stomach, he backed away from Q and took a moment to recover. Even once he straightened up, Q could see he still had a slight tremor. Probably only recently learned teleporting, Q discerned, remembering all the lava space host he had worked with over years. Teleporting was a more advanced skill for Space Host, and the starting period was unpleasant to say the least. Metro didn't trust Space Host teleporting weeks after they initially learned it, saying it would take at least a standard month before they got used to the momentum-canceling effects. A grimace formed on the Space Host's face, and he disappeared, teleporting again. Q thought he was going to be escorted from his cell, maybe have a bag put over his head, but again he'd underestimated the measures they would take. The cell, as he'd heard in the report, would have its own Etian shield, which would be up by now. They would have had it down for transfer only. Nothing about the interior of the cell would have given away that it was Etian shielded, but everything about it screamed that he was in a brig. The back wall of the cell was slanted inward, the cells up against the hull, with benches along the side walls. While not as poorly lit as his previous cell, he would still get better light from a candle, and he would be warmer too. Taking a seat, Q realized he couldn't hear anything from outside. Whatever happened out there, he wouldn't be able to hear or help. He could try listening in with his implant, but the risk of someone noticing seemed all too likely. Whoever was coming in better not arrive half-cocked. While he couldn't feel the ship move, Q thought he knew when they left orbit. It was when the touches on his mind started. He felt the touch every now and again from the mind host he assumed was stationed outside, and every time he let out a curse he knew the mind host couldn't hear. The touches only lasted a minute, but it felt like an eon. Forcing himself to keep his thoughts away from what he knew, his rage clouding his mind for both of them, he was left panting, grateful for the cold. He counted the minutes between each touch, wondering what was taking his mysterious would-be rescuers so long in the periods of rest he had. When the touch of his mind didn't come when it should have, Q knew what had begun. He knew that out there everything would be in turmoil, as opposing forces clashed at the edges of the ship, the invading force slowly closing in on the bridge and brig. And meanwhile, he was here, in the eye of the storm, calm as can be, oblivious to everything that transpired, but aware of it all the same. Considering for a moment, Q started jamming all long-range transmissions. Hopefully that wouldn't hinder his rescuer's efforts, but if they hadn't already done their own jamming, he was going to make sure no distress call was sent, if one hadn't already. When the fortified door to his cell opened with a hiss, Q frowned, standing up. That was quicker than he expected. The freighter consisted of a sizable force with a mixture of host and part hosts. To reach the brig already would require a small army. He was surprised to see the mind host from outside, this one human with brown hair, step down, wearing his black uniform with spiral-striped sleeves. Is the mind host a contact working for my would-be liberators? Q thought, his eyebrows sitting together in suspicion. As Q took a step forward, the mind host raised his hand, slamming Q against the wall of his cell, dissuading any delusions of the mind host working for his liberators. Unless my supposed liberators have a different purpose in me, considered. Struggling against the force of that telekinesis encompassing him, Q found he could barely twit inside the mind host's hold. The pressure on him increased, the mind host's power increasing as he got progressively angrier. "What have you done?" the mind host asked, quiet. His eyes flared, his face turning into a snarl. "What have you done?" he asked again, shouting now. "Who did you contact? How?" Q tried giving him a shrug, failing mostly. "I couldn't tell you. I barely understand it myself." The Mind Host's eye started to twitch at his answer, and he lifted Q to slam him against the wall again. "If you won't tell me, then I will take the answers I need." What was once a touch became an intrusion, an attack on his mind. Q bared his teeth, hissing and snarling, feeling the other mind penetrate into his, searching his thoughts and memories. Struggling mentally and physically like a rabid animal cornered, Q roared, the only thoughts in his mind being rage and hate, all focused on repelling the alien mind. His mind was his thoughts were his. Get out. Q, in the fog of his fury, vaguely noticed that the Mind Host was wincing, his face pained, and Q struggling was now managing to go against his hold. It was working. His rage was hurting the Mind Host. Pushing with all his strength, Q tried to get to the Mind Host's neck, to strangle the damn host's life from him. But he couldn't get himself off the wall. Despite what he'd done, the Mind Host still held him, and was still reading his memories, however slowly and painfully. A plasma bolt from the entrance suddenly shot the Mind Host, taking his entire head. Q and the body boat dropped to the floor at the same time, and Q gagged at the smell of the plasma boom not a foot away from him. Grabbing the Mind Host's dagger out of its sheath, Q brandished it at whoever was outside, his other hand moving to grab the plasma sidearm. A plasma rifle pointed at his hand made him freeze, Q slowly moving his hand away from the plasma arm, but still keeping the dagger in front of him. Wearing silver filter masks that covered their faces, there were two of them. A human male with short red hair, likely a sign of Maquis heritage, and a Phillies female around the same height, both wearing plasma-absorbent vests, which were black in areas. The Phillies was holding the plasma rifle, and the human having his slung over his shoulder. Then Q noticed the armbands, and his eyes narrowed. His rescuers were the revolutionaries. "Well, at least we don't have to go through the trouble of getting the doors open," the human commented. "Hello, Q. I'm pleased we can finally meet. You can take my comrade for arranging our rescue." He motioned to the Phillies next to him. Q gave them a blank look. "Hard to feel rescued with a plasma arm pointed at me." The human tilted his head. "Considering you pulled a knife on us, I think our precaution was warranted. Now that our positions are clear, however," he waved for the Phillies to lower her rifle, which he acquiesced. Eyeing the rifle, Q started unbuckling the Mind Host's belt, fitting it onto himself and holstering the dagger. Satisfied, he pushed his rescuers out of his way as he left the cell. The human grabbed his arm. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. "We control this ship. You aren't leaving." Pulling his arm away, he whirled on the human. "Sorry, but I have no business with you. Whatever you want to hire me for, I don't care." He turned away. The human rushed in front of Q and spread his arms out, blocking his path. "We just rescued you from what would have been your execution. Right now, you owe us, and I think the least you could do is hear us out." Rolling his eyes, Q sighed but nodded for him to go on. Putting his arms down, the human composed himself, clearly getting into negotiating mode. "As you seem to be aware, we've been trying to contact you about a job." "You're always trying to get me for a job," Q interrupted. "I've had more requests from you than I've had jobs total." "Yes," the human admitted, sounding frustrated, "but we have a special job which we wish to hire you for." Not interested, Q slid past him. "It's an assassination attempt on Mirage." Q froze. "Wasn't expecting that," he admitted to himself. He hadn't even heard a hint of this, so they'd done a good job of keeping it under wraps at least. But were they seriously trying to hire him for that? Now, why would I want to help you with a suicide mission? How many times have you tried to assassinate Mirage? 8? The revolutionaries have tried 5 times, and there have been 6 other attempts made by the royal families, among others. The last attempt we did was over a century ago. It's about time we tried again. Q chuckled, still facing away. Yeah, well, I amend my statement. I'm not just not interested, I'm completely against being used in a hopeless endeavor that you hope will make a good publicity stunt. You sure about that? The human asked. Because the way I see it, now more than ever is time to help us with this. That's so. Q could somehow tell the human was nodding despite not looking at him. Kulos has managed to convince Mirage to hunt you down. You'll never be able to avoid capture now. But if we can get rid of Mirage, things go back to normal, at least for you. The sources will have greater worries than a lone criminal, even one as notorious as you. And even if we don't succeed, and we do die, it won't look good for your brother to have you help us assassinate her. Your death will give your brother many more headaches to come, being related to a traitor. Who knows? Maybe we'll even get a chance to kill him before we're all dead. Q's jaw tightened, trying not to show how tempted he was. They were manipulating him, he knew. They also knew he wouldn't care. Everything they told him was true. Even if they weren't telling him everything, it was enough. A chance to kill Kulos, get Maka Mirage, and be in the galaxy's spotlight. He couldn't ask for anything more. I'll need something in return, Q told him. Some technology was confiscated when I was detained. Special technology. If you agree to help us, we'll see what you can do. You have our word. Q finally turned around. Then let's kill a god. End of chapter. Thoughts, concerns, comments?
Seems like there's lots of revolutionaries going around these days.
Indeed.
Getting a bit of a Rogue One vibe there. Congratulations, you are being rescued. Please do not resist.
You're right on that, actually, yeah.
And I very much approve of the killing of God.
Yes.
But as we all know, our religion is bourgeois means of controlling population and holding proletariat down.
May I
The
assume
god
that
is
you're
state.
may I assume that you're a very big fan of his Dark Materials?
Never did get to the God killing part though. Yeah, I couldn't get through that book. It was a very, very long time ago, and I fell off that wagon. I think I picked up Harry Potter in the meanwhile, and that kind of took over my next few years. And I never did get back into his Dark Materials.
To be fair, Tyler, Rogue One's the best thing out of Disney Star Wars and is okay. There's a slight...
Marxist versus Mormon fight. I don't care. I don't care if he's an atheist. I am not like frickin' Kevin Sorbo or Kirk, the idiot formerly known as Kirk Cameron, who thinks that atheism is the devil. I'm just like, atheism is just a bunch of people who want to be left alone by religion.
Yeah, that's honestly a good way to describe it.
I mean, the major Marxist or just indeed communist opposition to religion mostly doesn't really have a whole lot to do with doctrine or the veracity of any particular doctrine. It's how religion is basically exists in society. You know, particularly in Europe and especially among the Eastern Orthodox communities, it was very much a tool of the state. You know, if the police is the stick, religion is the carrot. So a lot of those religious institutions had very much a character of just, you know, getting the poor people to keep their heads down, focus on the next life so we can continue exploiting you in this life. That sort of idea. This is contrast with the American paradigm of religion, which is much more anarchic. You know, we Americans will very happily split their churches up into all these different denominations. And indeed, until about the middle of the 20th century, Christianity in America was largely a left-wing force. There were Christian socialists, there were Christian communists. Actually, the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a Christian socialist, and it didn't mention God until the 50s.
I did not know that. It's very
Oh
interesting.
yeah. Indeed, it could be argued that Jesus Christ himself was a bit of a proto-communist.
That's why the fight is funny.
In the Book of Acts, after the crucifixion, the people they lived together, and everything they held was in common, and they gave and whatever they had they gave to the poor. That sounds like a commune to me. And that's supposed to be the holiest time in history. Mankind was freshly redeemed, the shine was still on, and they were looking to prove it. So yeah, we need to get some of that good old fashioned Jesus juice back.
So you've actually read the Book of Mormon. So since that's
I have not read the Book of Mormon. That's just from the Bible.
Oh, that sounds like a pretty.
I understand there may be some parts that overlap. So I don't know. Maybe I've had a bit of a head start, or maybe I've done the required reading, as it were. But we're getting off topic.
Alrighty.
Okay.
All right.
Did the chapter seem okay?
I thought so. It definitely. I think I had a good sense as to what was going on. I probably would have had a better sense if I hadn't been skipping these things out to play Kingdoms Reborn and other city builders, which I have developed a bit of an addiction to. But I think I understood what was going on well enough.
Yeah, it's
Good.
fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
It's fairly straightforward. It's just a crazy plan. And guy doesn't want to be a part of it, but then finally he's like, okay.
Yes. Did it seem too quick of a chapter to basically end the arc of him?
No such
'Cause
thing as a quick chapter. As long as it does what it needs to do in the story, it is fine however long it needs to be.
Okay.
I am not someone to criticize this on length. I've had chapters in this book that were about 1,500 words, and this latest chapter ended up being about 5,000. I'm all over the place. I got no ground to criticize anybody.
Yep. I was just more concerned of pacing. Red pill addict.
YouTube thinks I'm a red pill addict. I want to know what your search history is that has made YouTube think that.
Oh boy.
For the first time, I've thought of Count Balerian's search history on YouTube, and I now don't want to think about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go down the store and pick up some brain bleach.
You try to remember what you were thinking, but it's all just pure white. Just a blank white void.
Yeah, all right. Let's. Why don't we get done to read his thing as a palate cleanser?
Palette cleanser.
Yeah.
I believe you, Becca. I haven't gotten that big of a chapter yet, but I've definitely been there where I've had to split. What was it? 6,000 or 9,000 word chapter into two.
Something like that.
Eyes bursting together. What are you speaking about, Balerian?
I mean, even the
Eyes
definition of a chapter
bursting.
is completely arbitrary based on the work. I'm in my previous book, The Gates of Dawn. Chapters were basically like 3 times the length of what I have for this book, but it's because each chapter was like about 3 individual things stitched together, all grouped among things. So it's entirely arbitrary based on the needs of the story itself and format of the story.
Alrighty. Cool. Something. Not my search history. What I'm saying in chat.
Oh boy.
No. No.
You need
I
to get a
am
burner account.
Valerian. I have met and am friends with multiple red pills. You do not qualify even in the slightest regard.
That must be heartbreaking for a man.
Yeah. Alrighty. So, Night of the Abyss. So, what we have here is Mordred, the wandering guy who clawed his way out of hell, essentially, a chasm in hell, is now joined up with the other characters in the story, Varys and Kara. Unfortunately, he took over Kara's husband's body, even though it wasn't his intention and it wasn't his fault, because the guy was going to be the meat sack for somebody already. He just took the place of that person. Now, and they were able to defeat a demon army, and they're making their way back to the city where they're from, to try and figure out a new plan of how to deal with the problems that they're going to be facing. Alrighty. Chapter 11. Uncomfortable questions. Mordred didn't like the looks that everyone was giving him as they marched back toward whatever city they were going to. It made him extremely uneasy and quite thankful that he didn't need sleep. If he did, he would be wary of someone trying to form a cult around him. At least he was sort of sure that was what they might do. He was fairly certain they wouldn't try murdering him, especially after he'd saved them. To a certain extent, he wished that he'd been able to heal some of the injured, but now that he had his latent power to draw on, mages could fix many of the wounded, especially the fresh ones. To the side, he saw that there was a riderless piebald mare being led by a young man who held the reins as gingerly as if he held a lion on a leash. Abruptly, the horse whinnied and started fighting the restraints on her, causing the soldier holding the reins to desperately attempt to get his charge under control. Tilting his head, Mordred walked over to the horse and extended a hand toward the fractious animal's reins. "Here, I'll take care of this," Mordred remarked, easily taking the reins and stroking the mare's neck. "Hey, girl," he said soothingly, "what have you been through the past few days?" "That horse was Captain Arthur's," the soldier remarked. He trailed off when he finally saw who he was talking to, now that the horse wasn't agitated. "Oh, it's all right. I'll take it from here." Mordred kept on stroking the mare's neck. "She's a beauty." She doesn't like just anybody riding her," the soldier warned. "She's been fighting me and all of her handlers. Won't let anybody touch her." "I'm not just anybody," Mordred remarked, loosening his grip on the reins while still stroking the horse's neck. She accepted it as meekly as a pony. The horse's erstwhile handler stared at him in abject shock. "How?" "She knows I never hurt her," Mordred said mildly. "She trusts me." Casually, he pulled himself into the saddle. What's her name? He asked as the horse pawed the ground, clearly eager to start running. Breeze, the soldier whispered as Mordred carefully began directing the horse with practiced ease. Ah, Mordred leaned down and patted the piebald mare's neck. I imagine you fit your name well. As if she could understand him perfectly, Breeze whickered proudly. I quite like horses, Mrs. Mordred remarked. I've always had a way with them. Everyone was staring at him now, almost as if he'd wrangled a lion with his bare hands. A sudden stamp from his new horse caused Mordred to shift instinctively and move in tandem with the animal. It had been a long time since he'd been in a saddle, but his instinctive skills hadn't diminished with his new body. Maybe I should try ingratiating myself somehow, he thought, glancing around at the soldiers and rubbing at the strange ridges along his cheeks. But how? I'm impressed she let you on her back. Mordred turned to see Kate right toward him. She's a very particular animal. I saw someone who needed my help, so I stepped in. Mordred stroked Breeze's face. No, she'll accept you. You're the only one that animal is going to let on her back without biting. Kate gave him a pleading look.
Something happened? Did we lose the commander?
The commander has fallen. Mission failed.
The Dun is dead. Long live the Dun.
Ding dong, the Dun is dead.
Mission failed. We'll get him next time.
Commander, we still need you.
Do we hear him? Is he back?
What? I'm
Becca
dead?
did the same joke as me, see? We can hear you now.
Okay, that's weird.
All right.
So, but yeah, crazy.
The funny thing is, you're reading the story
Oh.
while friends of mine are watching Spirit.
Oh. Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. That's a good movie.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I watched it a long time ago.
I thought you would be pleased at that. Mordred stroked Breeze's neck to try and gather his thoughts and figure out how to explain the minimal details about the afterlife he was aware of. So you can't bring him back like you were brought back after you died? Kate seemed somewhat unconvinced. Mordred carefully made himself not do any irritated, impatient, or disgruntled gestures or expressions. My soul is different from a regular human soul, he explained calmly. A human soul, when it died, is pulled to a place beyond anybody's reach but the Great Mother's. Mine, however, is a different story. The body of an elder one is destroyed. The soul goes to the Amaranth plane, what you might consider hell, damnation, or whatever you call the place where the souls of evilgoers go. From there, we live on that plane until we are called back to this plane of existence. Oh, Kate deflated, then swallowed. So he's not down in the Amaran plane, you called it? If he was a good man, like I assume, based on how many people came after him despite the dangers, no, he would never end up there, Mordred said honestly. He was a very good man, Kate smiled, though it had a tinge of melancholy. It's just wrong what happened. He had such a bright future ahead of him, and I'm just sad I never got the chance to be a grandmother, that he'll never get the chance to hold a baby in his arms. It's a special feeling to hold something you brought into this world. Mordred looked down at his malformed hand and closed it a couple times. It still felt weak and took more effort than it should to move it. Kate frowned and gave him an intensely searching look. Your tone implies you have some familiarity with the experience. She tilted her head. It's more I created bodies for two consciousnesses that had been there for a long time and had been waiting for me, Mordred explained. It was nothing like what you humans go through. They were waiting for me to make vehicles for her spirits, and it was only me who could do it. Oh, interesting. Kate actually sounded genuine. How much more can you tell me about your kind? Quite a bit, but I much prefer having specific questions as opposed to simply throwing information at whoever wants to know about creatures like me. Mordred raised a hand and flexed slightly, trying to force it to respond to his commands, but did so with effort and very slowly. What does it take to kill one of you? Kate asked. Mordred should have expected that question from a mother seeking revenge for a murdered son. Magic, but not something a human is capable of. Mordred extended his hand and changed his blade into its normal 6 feet long length. When we're born, a weapon comes into the world with us, but after we die, it remains with us. However, I happen to have collected a few, so I'd like to consult with you, Varys, and Kara on who you think should use them. Kara at least doesn't need it. I knew there was something odd about those weapons of hers. Kate shook her head. So she has 3 of those other weapons. No, it's one weapon split into 3 in a way I don't understand how to reverse. Mordred flexed his hand again. And it was almost as bad as being completely immobile. Most of the residual power is in the sword, but if we recombine them, then it would grant the abilities of an Elder One. As is, it will kill one of my kind. Kate raised a hand, her mouth dropping open slightly. Wait, having one of those weapons gives the powers of an Elder One? Yes, when one of us is permanently killed, usually while we're in the Amaran plane, except when they're killed using this sword. He gestured with the weapon in his hand. What you would call killing an Elder One is destroying their body only, usually. And the only way to do that is with something that can do enough damage to their bodies. And that sword kills their souls as well? Kate nodded toward the weapon. It absorbs them, and then I can use the souls to fuel myself. Think of it as added capacity. He changed his sword back into a scar on his wrist, as Tim put his hands back on the reins. So, what can you do? Kate asked, sounding as interested as a student at her favorite class. Mordred considered how best to explain. We all have high levels of stamina, speed, strength, agility, dexterity, poise, processing skills, but our most spectacular skill is the ability to change, create, and destroy. That's rather unspecific, Kate pressed. Can you elaborate? Can you create magical objects that maybe aren't as powerful as that sword, but could still be useful? No, but I can change something if I have, few few days, depending on what effect I want. Mordred paused, trying to think of an example. When he thought of one, he snapped his fingers, then created an illusory image of a small metal disc made from segmented metal pieces. This is a conversation device. It would take me a few hours to make it. First, to create the metals, iron, steel, zinc. Then I would pour power into them until they glowed. Then once I created more, I would place them together overnight and allow them to bond together to allow communication between all of them. Kate stared at him, jaw slack. What? Mordred asked. I am going to wring every bit of knowledge out of your head. Kate started to grin. All right. So you can change normal objects into magical ones if you're given enough time, and you can create illusions. What else can you do? Like I said, I can create, change, and destroy. Mordred continued his explanation. Destruction is extremely simple. I can erode something slowly with rust or decomposition, or I can simply instantly destroy something with fire or make it disintegrate. Creation is rather simple as well. Any mundane object, I can create it. Does it have to be inanimate? Kate asked. Like metals, food, wood, that sort of thing? No, it can be food. Mordred raised his hand and created a chicken leg, braised in several different savory sauces. Here, he offered it to Kate. Taste it. Blinking, Kate accepted the leg and took a tentative bite. Her eyes bulged and she immediately started tearing into it. This is amazing. She licked her fingers before tossing the bones away. You can change how warfare is waged, eliminate the need for supply lines. Yes, but there are other things that will be just as useful in warfare. Mordred thought for a moment. No, teleportation was never my strong suit. I need to be in the Silver City. I need to be able to use the pre-made devices. Wait, teleportation is possible? Kate whispered, putting her hand to her head. The amount of power required for that is almost incomprehensible. It took my mentor, Guinevere, roughly 6 months to construct one of 5 devices. Mordred's mouth twisted slightly at the memory. It was probably expending that much effort to create something so powerful that gave Artorias the opening to kill her. Morgana had disappeared soon after, never to be seen again. Artorias had probably destroyed her as well. Even then, Kate seemed to steady herself. Is this Silver City somewhere that you can take me? Maybe, but it would be a long journey and I would need many people to populate it since nobody ever knew about it besides me and my creator. Later, Mordred rubbed at his chest, feeling the pressure under his armor. I'd also like to have a map to see where it would be relative to our current location. There'll be time for that soon. Varys rode up beside them in most of the steadily receding tree line. We're almost there. Mordred nodded respectfully and was about to voice his acceptance when they arrived at the edge. As soon as his eyes fell on the city and the lake, his words died in his throat. What is it? Varys Draw, who was sword as Kate summoned a ball of purple fire over her palm. Is there some danger? This is where I used to live, Mordred whispered, staring at the city of Blackir. Stone weathered his age and flying a flag with a bear badger rather than a pristine rock with his banner and of the dragon wolf on the ramparts. Lake Blackir was my home. It's just called Black Lake now, Varys quickly shielded his sword. So you know this place. I lived here for centuries, Mordred whispered. I raised my 2 daughters here. I had my last stand here. finger shaking, he pointed to a blackened piece of wall. I was there when Jengarik blasted and burned that swath of the fortifications. It's still there after all this time. That's why nobody's been able to wash that stain away, Ferris remarked as his wife dismissed her fireball. Will you? I want to look around the city, Mordred interrupted him. I want to visit the people, get to know them. Ferris and Kate exchanged startled looks, then the grizzled human nodded. All right, stay with the procession until we get to the castle. Then you can go out sightseeing. Mordred nodded in acceptance, then turned his attention back toward the city. So many memories tied up with that place. Showing Fenra and Fafnir around the city after you made their bodies for them, teaching them how to use their powers, then holding up in the city while Alexandria besieged them. What's going on in that head of yours? Mordred stiffened as Kara rode up to him on that ugly brown stallion of hers. Despite how brutish Wrath looks, the stallion was one of the best animals he'd seen. It might not be showy, but it was an extremely intelligent horse. Fast, strong, great deal of stamina and endurance. Lots of memories, he admitted freely. Most of my happiest times are spent here. It's like coming home after an interminable journey. Must be nice. Kara swallowed and glanced away. She feels awkward around me. Oh, as she should. Mordred thought for a moment, then extended his normal right hand. I can't make right the wrong that was done to you, he said mildly, but I want you to know that I will do what I can to get justice. I promise that the people responsible will be justly rewarded. Carl looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Mordred let out a breath through his nose and placed his hand on hers. He squeezed it gently. Shall we try to be friends, at least? He asked, suppressing the intense feelings of desire that surged inside him at the feel of her hand through his armor. I hate human biological impulses. You scared me, she said abruptly. Mordred flinched, but didn't inquire further when she kept talking. When you looked at me, I thought, I saw hunger in there that frightened me. I don't scare easy. I'm sorry. Mordred couldn't think of anything better to say. Mentally, he was cursing the hasty fashion that she was brought into this world. She took a deep breath. So, do you, Elder Ones, have no concept of the idea of procreation or physical attraction? Mordred cut her off quickly. That is not what I was going to ask. Damn. I'm very sorry. I've just been quizzed, and when you said hunger, that's the best I could think of to reassure you that I'm never going to try anything. Oh. Kara paused, then nodded. Well, thanks, I guess. Mordred was seriously considered going through voluntary castration at that point. Maybe it would get the urges out of his mind so he could actually focus on what was important and not on how attractive her stop. Now, what was your question? Mordred hated the awkwardness he felt. I was just wondering what you think your enemies are going to do once they find out where you are, she said, sounding like something else was on her mind. Well, Alexandria is probably in the center of your country, likely in the highest echelons of the government. Our chief lieutenants, Cesarius and Jengarik, will be close by. Mordred flexed his fingers, trying to get used to how slowly it responded to it. His hand responded to his commands. They've probably replaced some very important people, maybe even your monarch. Kara's eyes widened. Oh, damn it, she whispered. That's why they sent such strange orders. That's why they had ambushes dashed throughout the area. Yeah, I imagine this is happening across various kingdoms. nymphs that currently exist. And we're the only ones aware of what is going on. Mordred leaned back in his saddle. Is it going to be hard to figure out who they've replaced? Kara asked. Or are they going to look like you? Thanks. Mordred raised his deformed hand and waved slightly. No, they are not going to be deformed like I am. What happened with me was a freak accident. Ah, but you'll know who they are when you see them, right? Kara pressed. There will be signs, yes, but it will mostly be you who spots the differences, since you are probably more familiar with these people than I am. Mordred created a wolf head medallion out of fray steel and began and spinning it through his fingers. There will be elements of the soul molding the body around it, but I didn't just change him into a completely different person. Yeah, you look like him, just 13 years younger. Kara swallowed and rubbed her eyes. So what differences are we looking for? Well, there are going to be a lot of subtle differences, younger appearances, obviously, but there will be few physical oddities like traces of green hair, unnatural eye color, strange lines across the body, that sort of thing. That it'll include the face, right? Kara made a motion around hers for emphasis. Yes, but it can be covered up with illusions or even more mundane means. Mordred adjusted his grip on the reins. My deformities are a little bit harder to cover up. Yeah, it seems like it. Kara gave the hand a strange look. Well, do you think you can beat them? Mordred thought about it for a moment. I can beat most of them 2-on-1. 3-on-1, no. They'd kill me. He flexed his hand again, forcing it through a range of motion. 4 can take me 1-on-1. And even if 2 of them ganged on me, and if 2 of them ganged up on me, I would probably lose. Is there any way to help you out, even the odds? Kara asked. Well, I was going to talk to you about that. Mordred glanced toward her massive bodyguard, walking beside them on foot. Your friend is carrying a now dead associate of mine's war club. It might look like wood, but it's only aesthetic. Who carried it before? Hearing Baruch's voice had been a non-existent event and that Mordred had thought the man was a mute. Was he a great warrior? She, actually, Mordred shrugged. Her name was Demitaria, a lady of nature, scourge of the logging and timber industry, and a habitual animal lover. Baruch glanced at his large metal-studded club, looking over the weapon for a moment, then shrugged. Sounds about right. What about mine? Kara asked, patting her sword. Dragon, fiery fishman living under the sea. Mordred scraped his fingers against each other. Something was done to it, though, and the power has been divided between the spear, the bow, and the sword. He nodded to the other 2 weapons. I could try to see what can be done, but I will admit I wasn't the best at research. I might even make it worse. Maybe. I'll have to think about it. Kara sounded unconvinced. And you did such a good job selling your minimal skills, Mordred thought as he turned his horse away and rode forward along the column. He didn't consciously realize that he was slightly ahead of everyone else until Varys yelled at him to get back with the column. Mordred snapped out of his daze and moved back. Eager to get home, I see, Varys said, eyebrow raised slightly. Yeah, a little bit, Mordred admitted as they entered the city. Immediately his eyes widened. They turned his city into a massive barracks. Without realizing, his lips peeled back as he looked at the places where beautiful statues had been replaced with squat uniform houses or worse, inferior sculpture works. What's wrong? Kate asked. Everything's wrong. Mordred tried closing his mouth and not acting the part of an enraged wolf, but was not totally successful in getting the snarl off his face. Pressed a clenched fist into the cantle of his saddle. Lost my place. Okay. But was unsecure. I built this city as a place of light, beauty, and music. Vision of a place where people would be able to pursue the arts, martial, culinary, sculpture, and painting. And now I look at what my work has come to. He gestured around the plain and buildings all around him. I can't believe that it has fallen so far from my vision. Varys and Kate exchanged startled looks, and Mordred abruptly realized this was the most aggressive emotion he'd displayed since they'd met him. Slowly, he forced himself to calm down and plastered a smile on his face. It's all right, I suppose. Progress and utility need to take precedence. Kate, right. Kate still sounded unconvinced. Promise me you won't do anything rash. Promise us. There are some things that cannot be abided, so no, I will not make that promise, Mordred said coldly. Such as, Varys asked, the defiling of things I hold sacred. Mordred's voice was still cold. There are many places in the city that I built for a specific purpose. If that the purpose for which it is being used is contrary to that, I will be furious. Varys looked at his wife, who put on a concerned look. Give me a list of buildings. No, I will find out on my own, Mordred said flatly. This is something I must do. Varys and Kate looked even more concerned. Just don't kill anyone, Varys instructed mildly. That I can promise. Mordred nodded. And I think we'll stop there.
They're gonna kill someone. They're totally gonna kill someone. Let me put it like this. If someone is not killed by the individual who made the said promise, you will be kicked out of the writers' union.
Wow, there's a writers' union.
Well,
Multiple writers' unions, actually.
Well, what if the subversion of expectations, he doesn't kill somebody, he just does a lot of property damage?
Exception may be made in certain circumstances. We will need to examine the extent of the damage, the original owners of the said properties, and the results stemming therefrom. Context is key.
When was the union made? I think it was made when the Inklings hung out together, and then it's been kind of a informal union ever since then.
Yeah, sounds right to me.
Like the Lord and Master of the current, or the president of the current writers' union is Brandon Sanderson. What if they kill him? Well, that would be rather impressive since they are just regular humans. That would be rather impressive, as to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow, it's only like 2 more pages, I suppose. Well, I'll just pick up the next bit of that at later, I suppose.
Yeah, keep us hungry.
Oh yeah, the next one's really short, so I can do quite a bit in the next thing. Well, win the day. That's usually associated with heroic action, and the Mordred dying would be very bad. So what? Scrappy Doo kills Mordred.
Oh God.
Puppy power.
No.
Yeah, I'm vetoing that.
Oh, don't worry. I have his death scene planned out. Don't worry. I have his death all written out. It does not include Scrappy Doo. I doubt that I will ever do anything with Scrappy Doo in it. Make Mordred a puppy. I did say that he has the power to create, change, and destroy, and technically the change can include himself. So maybe you might be predicting something in the future. Raffo on that one. Alrighty. Any thoughts, feedback, questions?
I think I'm good.
Alrighty. Well, I think that we will. Don't kill the poor chap. Yeah, he's had a hard life. He's had a hard life. He's been in hell for centuries. Needs something happy. But okay. Puppies destroy things. Yeah, they do. They're a bit of a mess maker. Alrighty. I'm gonna try to figure out a way to do our Batman era 2, and 3 streams where we talk about the Nolan movies and then the most recent outings of the Caped Crusader. I just need to wrangle the cats. That's a little bit. Anyway, I think we will call it good for today. Vicon Deus, my friends.
See ya.